In the sterile silence of a Chicago private ward, the most feared man in the city fell to his knees. Lorenzo Moretti had everything: money, power, and a criminal empire that spanned 3 states. But looking at his newborn twin sons, he felt utterly powerless. They were born with eyes that looked like clouded glass, blind to the world before they even took their first breath. Doctors called it a tragedy. Rivals called it karma. But months later, in a rundown diner at 2 a.m., a tired waitress dropped a coffee cup and whispered 4 words that would burn the city to the ground. She didn't say, "I love you." She didn't say, "I can help." She leaned in and whispered, "They are being poisoned." The rain battered the glass walls of the VIP suite at St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, drowning out the distant wail of Chicago sirens. Inside, the silence was heavier than the storm. Lorenzo Enzo Moretti stood by the window, his reflection ghostly against the dark city skyline. He was 32, built like a prize fighter, with a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and eyes that usually held a terrifying intensity. Tonight, those eyes were hollow. Behind him, the steady beep, beep, beep of the heart monitors was the only sign of life. In the lucite bassinets lay 2 tiny figures, swaddled in blue blankets, woven from cashmere worth more than most people's cars: Leo and Luca, the heirs, the future of the Moretti crime family. "Mr. Moretti?" Enzo didn't turn. He knew the voice. It was Dr. Sterling, the chief of neonatal surgery. The man was sweating. Enzo could smell the fear pheromones radiating off him from across the room. "Speak," Enzo commanded, his voice a low rumble. "We have run the tests again," Dr. Sterling stammered, shuffling papers that he was too nervous to actually read. The opacity in the corneas, the lack of pupillary response. It confirms our initial diagnosis. It appears to be a rare congenital anomaly, bilateral corneal opacity combined with optic nerve hyperplasia. Enzo turned slowly. The movement was predatory. "English, Sterling." "They are blind, sir," the doctor whispered, his voice cracking. "Your sons are blind. It is unlikely they will ever see." Enzo looked past the doctor, towards the bassinets. Blind. In his world, a world of sharks, snipers, and surveillance, blindness was not just a disability. It was a death sentence. A blind Don could not lead. A blind Don could not see the knife coming. "Is it genetic?" Enzo asked, his hand drifting to the pocket of his tailored suit where a silver lighter rested. We don't see any genetic markers from you or the late Mrs. Moretti," Sterling said, bowing his head respectfully at the mention of Isabella. Isabella. The pain hit Enzo like a physical blow. She had died 3 days ago on the operating table, her heart giving out just as the first baby cried. She had left him alone with 2 children he didn't know how to love, and a kingdom that would now view him as wounded prey. "Get out," Enzo said. "Sir, we need to discuss the care plan." "I said get out!" Enzo roared, grabbing a glass vase of white lilies from the side table and hurling it at the wall. It shattered with a violence that made the doctor flinch and scurry out the door. Enzo walked to the bassinets. He looked down at Leo, then Luca. Their eyes were open, milky and unfocused, wandering aimlessly. They looked like porcelain dolls, beautiful and broken. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I cannot protect you from the darkness if I am the one who brought you into it." The door creaked open again. It wasn't the doctor. It was Salvatore Moretti, Uncle Sal, the man who had raised Enzo after his own father took a bullet in '98. Sal was older, greying, with a face like worn leather and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Enzo," Sal said softly, closing the door. "The capos are asking. They want to know about the boys." "Tell them nothing," Enzo snapped. Sal walked over, looking down at the twins with an unreadable expression. "They will find out eventually, nephew. A blind wolf cannot lead the pack. We have enemies. The Russos are already encroaching on the docks. If they smell weakness—" "These are my sons, Sal!" "They are liabilities," Sal said coldly. "I say this with love. You need to focus on the business. Send them away. Switzerland, a sanatorium, somewhere they will be safe and out of sight." Enzo stared at his uncle, a flicker of rage igniting in his chest. "I will not hide my own blood." "Then you will bury them," Sal replied, adjusting his silk tie. "Think about it. For the good of the family." Sal left, leaving the smell of expensive cigar smoke and dread in the air. Enzo reached down and let Luca's tiny hand wrap around his pinky finger. The grip was surprisingly strong. Enzo made a vow then, in the dark room. He would burn the world down before he let anyone touch them, but he didn't know that the threat wasn't coming from the Russos or the police. The threat was already inside the walls. 6 months later, the bell above the door of Joe's all-night diner jingled, announcing a customer. Sarah Jenkins didn't look up immediately. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing a ketchup stain off the checkerboard floor. She was 24, with hair the color of roasted chestnuts, tied back in a messy bun, and a uniform that was 2 sizes too big. She looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that comes from working double shifts to pay off debts that weren't hers. "Coffee, black." The voice was rough, commanding. Sarah stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. She grabbed the pot and turned to booth 4, the one in the darkest corner. The man sitting there was terrifyingly handsome, but he looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He wore a black trench coat, wet from the relentless Chicago drizzle. He was staring out the window, his jaw clenched. Sarah knew who he was. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the face of Lorenzo Moretti. He was the reason rent was stable in this district, but also the reason people didn't walk down certain alleys at night. "Here you go," Sarah said softly, pouring the steaming liquid. He didn't acknowledge her. He just stared at a photo resting on the table. It was a picture of 2 baby boys. Sarah hesitated. She shouldn't speak. The first rule of waiting tables for mobsters: be furniture, be invisible. But something about the photo caught her eye. She had been a nursing student once, top of her class at Johns Hopkins, before her brother's gambling debts forced her to drop out and go into hiding. She knew pathology. She knew signs. "Cute kids," she said, instantly regretting it. Enzo's head snapped up. His eyes were like ice. "Do you make it a habit to speak to customers who want to be left alone?" Sarah swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I noticed the eyes." Enzo's hand tightened around the coffee mug. "What about them?" "They look clouded," Sarah said, her curiosity overriding her fear. "Congenital cataracts?" Enzo scoffed, a bitter sound. "Corneal opacity. They're blind, hopeless. That's what the best doctors in the country say." Sarah looked closer at the photo. The lighting in the picture was good. She could see the milkiness, yes, but she also saw something else. A faint yellowish ring around the iris, and the skin around their eyelids. It was slightly inflamed, a dusky red. Do they have a rash around the temples?" Sarah asked. Enzo frowned, taken aback by her persistence. "Eczema. The doctors gave them a cream. It doesn't help. Why do you care?" "I used to be a nursing student," Sarah said. She glanced around the empty diner to make sure her manager, grumpy old Al, wasn't watching. "Look, Mr. Moretti, I don't want trouble. But eczema combined with that specific type of clouding. And are they irritable? Do they vomit often?" Enzo went still. "They throw up every feed. We switched formulas 10 times. The doctors say it's stress or colic." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The pattern was forming in her head. It wasn't genetic. It wasn't an accident. It was a toxicity profile she had read about in a dusty toxicology textbook during her 2nd year. A specific, rare, heavy metal compound, thallium, or perhaps something synthetic, used in industrial manufacturing. It mimicked natural blindness if administered in microdoses over time. "It's not colic," Sarah whispered. Enzo stood up, towering over her. The air in the diner changed, becoming heavy with violence. What are you saying?" Sarah looked at the door. She knew that speaking this out loud could get her killed. If the doctors missed it, it was because they were incompetent, or because they were paid to miss it. She leaned in, her voice trembling but firm. She had to save those babies. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her blue eyes locking with his dark ones. "Check the formula bottles." Enzo stared at her. "What?" Sarah leaned closer, until her breath hitched in the air between them. This was the point of no return. "They are being poisoned." The silence that followed was deafening. Enzo didn't blink. He didn't breathe. He looked at the waitress, this girl in a stained apron with tired eyes, and he searched for a lie. He found none. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice lethal. "Just a waitress," Sarah said, backing away. "But if I were you, I'd get a blood panel done. Test for heavy metals, and don't use your usual doctor." Enzo grabbed his coat. He threw a $100 bill on the table, not breaking eye contact. "If you are lying to me, I will find you. And if you are right—" He didn't finish the sentence. He turned and strode out of the diner into the rain, the bell jingling cheerfully behind a man who was about to start a war. Sarah watched his car speed away, black tires screeching on the wet asphalt. She hugged her tray to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just poked the bear, but she couldn't forget the faces of those babies. Outside, in the shadows across the street, a figure in a grey hoodie watched the diner. He raised a phone to his ear. "The boss was talking to the girl," the figure said into the phone. "Yeah, the waitress." "No, I couldn't hear. Okay, I'll take care of it." The figure hung up and reached into his jacket, his hand closing around the cold steel of a silencer. The rain had turned into a deluge, washing the grime off the Chicago streets, but doing nothing to cleanse the rot beneath. Inside the diner, Sarah Jenkins flipped the sign to "closed." Her hands were shaking. She had just accused the most dangerous man in the city of being a negligent father, or worse, a clueless one. But she couldn't shake the image of those babies, the milky eyes, the red skin. It was textbook heavy metal poisoning. If she was right, they had days, maybe weeks, before their organs shut down. She locked the front door and went to the back alley to take out the trash. The heavy metal door creaked, rusting hinges screaming in the night. She tossed the black bag into the dumpster. As she turned to go back inside, a shadow detached itself from the brick wall. "Rough shift?" a voice rasped. Sarah froze. The man was wearing a grey hoodie, the hood pulled low. He wasn't a customer. He stood with the unnatural stillness of a predator. "We're closed," Sarah said, her voice tight. She took a step back toward the door, reaching for the handle. "You talk too much, Sarah," the man said. He stepped into the singular pool of light from the street lamp. There was a suppressor screwed onto the end of a pistol in his hand. Mr. Moretti doesn't like loose ends. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. Enzo sent him? Had she offended him that much? No, that didn't make sense. If Enzo wanted her dead, he would have done it in the booth. "I didn't say anything," Sarah stammered, her hand finding the door handle. Locked. The wind had blown it shut behind her. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. "Open your mouth, close your casket," the gunman muttered. He raised the weapon. Sarah didn't scream. Survival instinct, honed from years of dodging loan sharks looking for her brother, kicked in. She grabbed the heavy lid of the dumpster and slammed it down with a deafening clang, trying to startle him. It worked for a microsecond. The gunman flinched. Sarah bolted, splashing through puddles, heading for the main street. Thwip! A bullet chipped the brick inches from her ear. She ducked, scrambling behind a stack of wooden pallets. "Nowhere to run, darling," the man called out, his footsteps splashing closer. "Make it easy." Sarah looked around wildly. A broken bottle, a rusted pipe. Nothing that could stop a bullet. She curled into a ball, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the end. Screech! A black SUV roared into the alley mouth, high beams blindingly bright, cutting through the rain like lasers. The engine revved, a guttural mechanical roar. and the car accelerated straight at the gunman. The hitman dove to the side, rolling over wet asphalt. The SUV skidded to a halt, blocking Sarah from the shooter. The back door flew open. "Get in!" It wasn't Enzo. It was a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow. This was Dante, Enzo's head of security. Sarah hesitated. "If you want to live, get in the damn car." Dante roared, firing a suppressing shot at the hitman who was scrambling back to his feet. Sarah dove into the back seat. Before she could even close the door, the SUV peeled out, tires smoking. Inside, the leather interior smelled of expensive cologne and gun oil. Sitting on the other side of the seat, reloading a silver pistol, was Lorenzo Moretti. He looked furious. Not at her, but at the situation. I thought you sent him," Sarah gasped, pressing her back against the door, water dripping from her hair onto the pristine leather. Enzo looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "If I wanted you dead, Miss Jenkins, I wouldn't send a freelancer in a hoodie. I'd do it myself." "Then who?" "That is what we are going to find out," Enzo said grimly. He holstered his gun and leaned forward. "You said my sons are being poisoned. You better be right, because I just started a war to save a waitress." "I'm right," Sarah said, her voice trembling but her chin high. "And if you want to save them, you can't take them back to that hospital. Whoever is poisoning them has access." Enzo stared at her for a long beat. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw steel. She was terrified, but she was thinking clearly. He tapped the partition. "Dante, change of plans. We aren't going to the mansion. Go to the safe house and call Doc Miller. Tell him to bring a toxicology kit." "Yes, boss." Enzo turned back to Sarah. "You're not a waitress tonight, Sarah. Tonight, you're the only person in Chicago I trust. Don't make me regret it." The safe house was a penthouse apartment in a building Enzo owned under a shell company. It had bulletproof windows, a private elevator, and a medical bay that rivaled most urgent care clinics. 2 hours later, the atmosphere in the living room was suffocating. Leo and Luca were there, sleeping fitfully in portable cribs. They looked pale, their breathing raspy. Sarah was hovering over them, checking their pulses every 5 minutes. She had washed her face and changed into a clean, oversized t-shirt Dante had found, but she still looked on edge. Dr. Miller, a wiry man in his 60s who had served as a combat medic in Desert Storm, walked out of the makeshift lab in the kitchen. He held a tablet in his hands. His face was ashen. Enzo stood by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. "Well?" Miller looked at Enzo, then at Sarah. He took off his glasses. "The girl was right." The air left the room. "Thallium," Miller said. "It's an old poison. Odorless, tasteless. In the old days they used it in rat poison. It causes hair loss, nerve damage, and optic nerve atrophy." Enzo's glass shattered in his hand. He didn't flinch as the amber liquid and shards of crystal dripped onto the carpet. "They blinded my sons?" "The blindness is a symptom of the toxicity," Miller explained rapidly. "The clouding, it's a deposit build-up." "Enzo, the levels in their blood are dangerously high. Another week, and their kidneys would have failed. They would have died." Enzo looked at the twins, his vision blurred with a red rage so potent it nearly brought him to his knees. Someone had been spoon-feeding death to his children, every day, every meal. "Is it reversible?" Enzo asked, his voice a low growl. "If we start chelation therapy immediately," Sarah spoke up, stepping forward. "Prussian blue, it binds to the thallium and pulls it out of the body. The nerve damage, we won't know until the poison is gone, but they might see again. There's a chance." Enzo looked at her. "Do it. Miller, give them whatever they need." "Sarah, you assist him." "Me?" Sarah asked. "You caught it when the experts didn't," Enzo said. "You stay with them. You don't leave their side. Dante stands guard at the door. No one enters. No one leaves." Enzo grabbed his coat. "Where are you going?" Sarah asked, stepping toward him. "To find the hand that held the spoon," Enzo said. Enzo, Sarah said, using his first name without thinking. It has to be someone who prepares the bottles. Who feeds them? The nanny, Enzo said. Greta. She's been with the family for 20 years. She raised me. Poison is a woman's weapon, Miller muttered, or a coward's. Greta is at the mansion, Enzo said, checking his weapon. I'm going to ask her why she decided to kill my legacy. The Moretti estate was a fortress on the outskirts of the city, iron gates, patrolling guards, and a silence that felt like a graveyard. Enzo stormed through the front doors, Dante flanking him, the staff scattered, sensing the violence radiating off the Don. He found Greta in the kitchen, sterilizing bottles. She was a plump, grandmotherly woman, with grey hair and a warm smile that faltered when she saw Enzo's face. Enzo, my dear, what is— Enzo didn't speak. He walked over, swept the tray of bottles off the counter, and slammed his gun onto the marble island. The boys are sick, Greta, Enzo said softly. Greta's hands trembled. She clutched her rosary beads. Oh, the poor angels. Did the doctors find a cure for their eyes? They found thallium, Enzo said. Greta's face went white, not the confusion of innocence, but the pallor of guilt. She took a step back. I don't know what that is. Don't lie to me, Enzo roared, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceilings. You feed them. You mix the formula. You are the only one. Greta burst into tears. She collapsed onto a stool, covering her face. I didn't know. I swear on the Virgin Mary. I didn't know it was poison. Enzo grabbed her by the shoulders. What did you give them? The vitamins, Greta sobbed. Mr. Salvatore. Sal. He gave me a vial. He said the doctors were incompetent. He said it was a holistic treatment from Italy. Holy water and herbs, he said. He said it would cure their eyes. He said if I told you, the doctors would stop us and the boys would stay blind forever. I just wanted to help them. Enzo released her, revulsion curling in his stomach. Sal, his uncle. The man who sat by his bedside when his father died. The man who called the twins liabilities. Sal hadn't just tried to kill them. He had used an old woman's love and superstition to do it, keeping his own hands clean. Where is Sal now? Enzo asked, his voice dead calm. He's in the study, Greta wept, having a meeting with the capos. They are discussing the succession. Of course they were. With Enzo distracted by dying children, Sal was making his move to take the throne. Enzo turned to Dante. Lock her in the cellar. She lives only if my sons live. And Sal? Dante asked, cracking his knuckles. Sal thinks I am grieving in a hospital room, Enzo said, adjusting his cuffs. He thinks the twins are fading away. Let's go give him some good news. Enzo walked towards the study. The double oak doors were closed. He could hear voices inside. Laughter. The clink of glasses. He kicked the doors open. The room went silent. 6 men sat around the mahogany table. At the head sat Uncle Sal, holding a cigar. Enzo. Sal stood up, a fake smile plastered on his face. We were just drinking to your strength in this difficult time. Enzo walked to the table. He didn't sit. He looked at each of the capos. Then he looked at Sal. The twins are doing better, Enzo lied smoothly. We found a new treatment, a dietary change. Sal's smile twitched, a micro-expression of disappointment that only a master reader would catch. Is that so? That is wonderful news. A miracle. Yes, Enzo said, walking slowly around the table until he stood behind Sal. It turns out they were having a bad reaction to some vitamins they were taking. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. The other capos shifted in their seats. They sensed the shift in the wind. Is that right? Sal said, puffing on his cigar, though his hand wasn't steady. Well, good thing you stopped it. I did, Enzo said. He leaned down, whispering into Sal's ear. I stopped the vitamins, and now I need to stop the supplier. Enzo pulled Sal's chair back. Get up, Uncle. We're going for a ride. This is ridiculous, Sal sputtered, looking to the other capos for support. "You are tired, Enzo. You are imagining things." "Am I?" Enzo threw the toxicology report onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, stopping in front of the oldest capo, Don Vinny. Vinny put on his reading glasses. He read the summary. He looked up at Sal, disgust on his face. "In the Mafia, you kill men. You kill soldiers. You do not poison babies." It was a breach of the code so vile it carried an immediate death sentence. "Thallium," Vinny read aloud. "Sal, this is low. Even for you." Sal realized the room had turned. He lunged for the gun inside his jacket. Enzo was faster. He grabbed Sal's wrist, twisted it with a sickening crunch, and slammed his face into the table. "Take him," Enzo commanded the guards. "Put him in the trunk. I have a special use for him." As they dragged Sal away, screaming curses, Enzo looked at his hands. They were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He had cut out the cancer, but the war wasn't over. Now he had to go back to the safe house. He had to face the woman who had saved his life and his son's lives. He realized with a start that he wanted to see Sarah more than he wanted to kill Sal, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. Back at the safe house, the mood was quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic pump of the IV machines. Sarah sat in a rocking chair, holding Leo. The baby was hooked up to an IV line delivering the Prussian blue. He was sweating, his small body fighting the toxins. Enzo entered the room quietly. He had washed the blood off his hands, but he still smelled of the cold night air. He watched her for a moment. She looked angelic, bathed in the soft light of the nursery lamp. She was humming a lullaby, something soft and sad. "How are they?" Enzo asked. Sarah looked up. She looked exhausted. "The fever broke. Dr. Miller says their vitals are stabilizing. It's working, Enzo. The poison is leaving their systems." Enzo walked over and knelt beside the chair. He looked at his son. For the first time in months, Leo didn't look like he was in pain. He looked peaceful. "You did this," Enzo said, looking up at Sarah. "You saved the Moretti line." "I just did my job," Sarah whispered. "No," Enzo said. He reached out, his hand hesitating, then covering hers where it rested on the baby's back. His hand was large, rough, scarred. Hers was small and delicate. "You did more than a job. You risked your life for strangers." "They aren't strangers anymore," Sarah said softly. Enzo looked into her eyes. They were blue, like the ocean, deep and honest. He felt a pull in his chest he hadn't felt since Isabella died. Maybe not even then. This was different. This was forged in fire. "You can't go back to the diner, Sarah," Enzo said seriously. "Sal has allies. People will know you helped me. You are a target now." "So what do I do?" Sarah asked, a flicker of fear returning. "Run? Hide?" "Stay," Enzo said. The word hung in the air. "Stay here, with them, with me. Be their nurse, be their guardian. I will give you anything you want. Money, safety, a new life." Sarah looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at the Mafia Don, who was looking at her with a vulnerability that terrified her. "I don't want money," Sarah said. "Then what?" "I want to know that they are safe," she said. "And I want to finish my nursing degree. Someday." "Done," Enzo said. "I'll build you a university if I have to. Just stay." Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll stay." Enzo squeezed her hand. For a moment, the barrier between them, the line between the criminal and the civilian, vanished. Suddenly Luca, the other twin in the crib, let out a small cry. Sarah jumped up and went to the crib. Enzo followed. Luca was blinking. His eyes, usually wandering aimlessly, were fixed on something. The nightlight. He was staring directly at the small, glowing star plugged into the wall. As Sarah moved her hand in front of the light, Luca's eyes tracked the shadow. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Enzo!" "What?" Enzo asked, his heart hammering. "Look," Sarah whispered, tears filling her eyes. "He's tracking the shadow. The cloudiness, it's clearing. He can see the light. Enzo leaned over the crib. He waved his hand in front of Luca's face. The baby's eyes moved, following the motion. It wasn't perfect vision, but it was sight. Enzo let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He picked Luca up, holding him tight to his chest. "He sees," Enzo whispered into the baby's hair. "He sees." He looked at Sarah over the baby's head. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes said everything. "You gave me back my world." But peace in the Mafia is a fleeting thing. Just as the moment of joy settled, Dante's voice came over the intercom. "Boss, we have a problem." Enzo's face hardened instantly. "What is it?" "Sal's phone is ringing," Dante said. "It's not one of the capos. It's a number from New York. The Russians." Enzo's eyes narrowed. The Russians. This went deeper than a family feud. Sal had sold the twins out to a foreign cartel in exchange for power. Enzo carefully placed Luca back in the crib. He turned to Sarah. The soft father was gone. The Don was back. "Lock the door," Enzo commanded. "Dante, get the car. We aren't done yet." The Chicago docks at 4 a.m. were a graveyard of rusted metal and shipping containers. The fog rolled in off the lake, thick and freezing, masking the shapes of the cranes that loomed like skeletal giants in the mist. Enzo Moretti sat in the driver's seat of the black SUV, the engine idling silently. Next to him, Dante was checking the magazine of an assault rifle. In the back, Uncle Sal was bound and gagged, his eyes wide with a terror that had finally pierced his arrogance. Enzo turned to look at the traitor. He pulled the gag down. "One last chance, Sal," Enzo said, his voice devoid of any familial warmth. "Which container?" "You can't go in there, Enzo," Sal wheezed, blood trickling from his nose. "It's the Volkov Brigade, ex-Spetsnaz. They aren't street thugs. They'll butcher you." "I didn't ask for a biography. I asked for a location." Enzo pressed the barrel of his pistol against Sal's kneecap. "Container 404, the red one near the dry dock," Sal screamed. "They're waiting for my call to confirm the twins are dead. If I don't call in 10 minutes, they leave. They take the territory." Enzo nodded. He re-gagged Sal and turned to Dante. "Leave him here. If we don't come back, burn the car with him in it." Dante nodded solemnly. "It's been an honor, boss." "Don't get sentimental, Dante. We have work to do." Enzo stepped out into the cold mist. He wasn't wearing body armor. He wanted to feel the danger. He moved through the maze of containers, a ghost in a tailored suit. He could hear the low murmur of Russian voices ahead. He rounded the corner of a blue container and saw them. 6 men, heavily armed, standing around a folding table under a floodlight. In the center stood a man in a white fur coat, Nikolai Volkov, the man who had provided the thallium, the man who had sentenced 2 innocent babies to darkness. Enzo didn't wait for a signal. He didn't offer a monologue. He raised his weapon and fired. The first shot took out the floodlight, plunging the area into chaos. Crack thoom! The darkness became Enzo's ally. He moved with a brutality that was terrifying to behold. He was no longer a businessman. He was a father whose children had been hunted. He dismantled the Russian guards with surgical precision. A double tap here, a knife to the throat there. Dante provided covering fire from the flank, his rifle thundering in the enclosed space of the shipping yard. Within 2 minutes, the silence returned, broken only by the groans of the dying. Enzo walked into the center of the carnage. Nikolai was on the ground, clutching a bleeding stomach. He looked up, his face twisted in a sneer. "Moretti!" Nikolai spat, blood bubbling on his lips. "You are persistent." Enzo kicked the gun away from Nikolai's hand. He stood over the Russian, looking down with cold indifference. "Why?" Enzo asked. "Business is business, but the poison, that was personal." "Why my sons?" Nikolai laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. "You think this is about territory? You arrogant American. Do you remember Vienna? 5 years ago?" Enzo frowned. Vienna, a deal gone wrong. A car bomb meant for him that had killed my brother. Nikolai hissed. "You killed my brother. I didn't want to just kill you, Enzo. I wanted you to watch your legacy rot. I wanted you to raise broken sons. I wanted you to suffer every day looking into their dead eyes." Enzo stared at the man. The cycle of vengeance. It was a wheel that crushed everything in its path, including children. "They aren't broken," Enzo said softly. "They can see, and the last thing you will see is the father who protected them." Enzo raised his gun. "Wait," Nikolai gasped. I have the antidote, the pure chemical formula, to reverse the damage completely. It's in my pocket." Enzo paused. He crouched down and reached into Nikolai's coat. He pulled out a small flash drive. "Is this it?" "Yes," Nikolai wheezed. "Mercy." Enzo pocketed the drive. He stood up and looked at the shipping containers surrounding them. "You tried to take the light from my children, Nikolai. It is only fitting you die in the dark." Enzo turned and walked away. "Dante," Enzo called out, "kill the lights." Dante shot the remaining emergency lantern. The dock plunged into absolute pitch black. "Enzo, you coward!" Nikolai screamed from the darkness. Enzo didn't look back. He walked towards the car, the sounds of the dying Russian fading behind him. The war was over, but the hardest part was just beginning. Turned 3 months later. The Moretti mansion was different now. The heavy velvet drapes that used to block out the sun had been pulled back. Light flooded the hallways. The silence that once suffocated the house had been replaced by new sounds, the chirping of electronic toys, the clatter of bottles, and the soft humming of a woman. Sarah Jenkins walked down the grand staircase, carrying a basket of laundry. She wore jeans and a sweater, a stark contrast to the formal uniforms of the staff. Technically, she was still an employee. Enzo had hired her as the private nurse for the twins. But everyone in the household, from the gardeners to the guards, knew she was the lady of the house in everything but name. She walked into the nursery. The transformation was miraculous. Leo was sitting up in his crib, banging a red block against the bars, laughing. His eyes, once milky and wandering, were now a piercing, clear brown. They tracked Sarah as she entered the room. "Hey there, Trouble?" Sarah smiled, picking him up. Luca was on the playmat, doing tummy time. He pushed himself up and looked at her, his vision tracking her movement perfectly. The chelation therapy, combined with the data from Nikolai's flash drive, had worked wonders. The ophthalmologists were stunned. They called it a medical miracle. Sarah knew it wasn't a miracle. It was tenacity. The door opened and Enzo walked in. He looked tired. The cleanup after the Russian incident had been extensive. He had consolidated power, purged the ranks of anyone loyal to Sal, and established a truce with the other families. He stopped in the doorway, watching Sarah hold his son. The tension that permanently lived in his shoulders seemed to evaporate when he looked at them. "Dr. Aris called," Enzo said, loosening his tie. He reviewed the latest scans. Sarah held her breath. "And? 20/40ths vision in the left eye, 20/30ths in the right," Enzo said, a small smile touching his lips. "They'll need glasses when they start school, but they will see everything, Sarah. The sunset, the ocean, everything." Sarah let out a sigh of relief, burying her face in Leo's soft neck. "Thank God." Enzo walked over. He didn't reach for the baby. He reached for Sarah. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It wasn't God," Enzo said intently. "It was you." Sarah looked up at him. The air between them crackled with the unspoken things that had been building for months. The late-night coffees in the kitchen, the shared fear in the hospital waiting rooms, the silent understanding that they were a team. But Sarah pulled back slightly. She placed Leo back in his crib. "Enzo, we need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. Enzo's face fell. The wall went back up instantly. "You want to leave? You finished your job. The boys are cured." "No," Sarah said. "I don't want to leave. But look at where we are. You are the Don of the Moretti crime family, and I'm a nursing school dropout who used to serve coffee. Us. It's dangerous. For me. For the boys." "I removed the threats," Enzo said sharply. Sal is gone. The Russians are gone. There will always be another Sal, Sarah argued gently. That's your life, Enzo. Violence. Retribution. I saw what you looked like when you came back from the docks that night. You had blood on your shoes. I can't raise these boys to be that. And I can't be with a man who hides half his life from me. Enzo walked to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds. He knew she was right. He was a monster who had tricked an angel into living in his cave. So what do you want? Enzo asked quietly. Name your price, Sarah. I promised you the world. I don't want your money, Sarah said, stepping closer to him. I want you, but not the Don. I want the father. I want the man who sat in my diner and cried over a photograph. If we are going to do this, if I am going to stay, things have to change. Legitimate business only. No more drugs, no more hits. You turn the family into an empire, not a gang. Enzo turned around. It was an impossible request. You don't just leave the life. But then he looked at Leo and Luca. He remembered the darkness. He remembered the feeling of helplessness. He realized he had already changed. The old Enzo would have laughed at her. The new Enzo, the father, knew that she was the only path forward that didn't end in a coffin. It will take time, Enzo said. Years, maybe. To wash the money. To cut the ties. I have time, Sarah said softly. Enzo looked at her, really looked at her. You would stay? Through the transition? It will be dangerous. I faced down a hitman in an alley with a dumpster lid. Sarah smiled weakly. I think I can handle a few board meetings. Enzo crossed the distance between them. He framed her face in his hands. Then stay, he whispered. Be the light, because I have enough darkness for both of us. He kissed her then. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was desperate, claiming, a seal on a pact that would reshape the criminal underworld of Chicago. It tasted of hope. 4 years later, redemption, Enzo Moretti learned, was not a sprint. It was a marathon run on broken glass. For 4 years, the city of Chicago watched a transformation that baffled the FBI and the tabloids alike. The Moretti crime family didn't disappear. It evolved. It was a brutal, exhausting purge. Enzo had sold off the casinos, burned the drug routes, and fired half his payroll. He traded silencers for subpoenas and street corners for boardrooms. There were nights when the old enemies, the remnants of the cartels, the bitter rivals, came knocking, testing to see if the Lion of Chicago had lost his teeth. They found out, usually the hard way, that Enzo had not become weak. He had simply become protective. Now, the result of that bloody metamorphosis stood gleaming under the midday sun. The headline on the Chicago Tribune kiosk read, From Shadows to Sight, Moretti unveils state-of-the-art pediatric eye center. A crowd of hundreds had gathered outside St. Jude's Hospital. Flashbulbs popped like stroboscopic lightning. At the podium stood Lorenzo Moretti. He was 36 now, streaks of distinguished grey touching his temples, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the hospital wing he was donating. But the crowd wasn't looking at him. They were looking at the woman standing to his right and the 2 boys holding his hands. Sarah Moretti looked breathtaking. She wore a dress of deep sapphire blue, the same color as the nursing scrubs she had worn when she graduated top of her class the previous spring. She wasn't just the Don's wife, she was the director of nursing for this new wing. She stood tall, no longer the terrified waitress hiding behind a dumpster, but a matriarch who had walked through fire. And then there were the twins. Leo and Luca were 4 years old. They were dressed in miniature tuxedos, looking like little princes. They wore glasses with thick black frames, which only served to magnify their eyes. Eyes that darted around the crowd, taking in the colors, the faces, the movement. Enzo leaned into the microphone. The crowd went silent. 4 years ago, Enzo began, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying the weight of his past. I stood in this hospital and was told my sons would never see the sun. I was told to accept the darkness. I was told it was hopeless. He paused, looking down at Luca, who was busy trying to catch a floating dandelion seed. But I learned that hopeless is a word used by men who are afraid to fight, Enzo continued. I learned that vision isn't just about optics. It's about seeing the truth when it's hidden. It's about seeing the danger before it strikes. And most importantly, it's about seeing the people who matter. He gestured to the ribbon. This wing is for the children who are told it is hopeless. Today we tell them otherwise. Enzo picked up the giant ceremonial scissors, but he didn't cut the ribbon. He handed the scissors to Leo and Luca. Together, Enzo whispered to them. The boys, grinning, clamped their small hands around the handles. With a snap, the red ribbon fell. The crowd erupted in applause. Inside the VIP reception, the atmosphere was suffocatingly polite. Senators and judges who had once signed warrants for Enzo's arrest were now shaking his hand, drinking his champagne, and calling him a pillar of the community. Enzo hated it. He felt like a tiger in a petting zoo. He caught Sarah's eye from across the room. She gave him a subtle nod, a secret signal they had developed over the years. Code Red, get us out of here. 20 minutes later, the Secret Service detail was left confused at the entrance as a nondescript sedan slipped out the back exit. They didn't go to a Michelin star restaurant. They didn't go to the penthouse. They drove to the edge of the industrial district, to a place where the neon sign flickered with a missing letter. Joe's All-Night Tea Diner. The bell above the door jingled. It was the same sound that had haunted Enzo's dreams for years. The place was empty, save for old Al, the manager, who was still grumpy and still cleaning the same spot on the counter. Al looked up, squinting at the expensive suits. Table for 4, Enzo said, sliding a $100 bill onto the counter. And we're not here. Al grunted, pocketing the bill. Kitchen's closing in 20. Make it quick. They slid into booth 4, the same booth where Enzo had sat in the dark, rain dripping from his coat, staring at a photo of blind babies. Daddy, this place smells like old French fries. Leo wrinkled his nose, adjusting his glasses. It smells like history, Leo, Sarah said, sliding in next to Enzo. Sit. Use your napkin. Can we have pancakes? Luca asked, his eyes wide as he looked at the laminated menu. Look, they have pictures of pancakes. Enzo felt a lump in his throat. Look, they have pictures. A sentence so simple, yet it felt like a psalm. Or you can have whatever you want, Enzo said hoarsely. Pancakes, ice cream, the whole damn kitchen. As the boys busied themselves with coloring the kids' menu, Enzo turned to Sarah. The neon light from the window washed over her face. She looked tired from the event, but happy. Enzo reached across the chipped formica table and covered her hand with his. His hand was scarred, carrying the history of violence. Her hand was soft, carrying the history of healing. I was thinking, Enzo said quietly, so the boys wouldn't hear, about the odds. The odds of the surgery working? Sarah asked. The odds of you, Enzo said. The odds of a waitress at 2 a.m. noticing a rash on a photograph. The odds of you having the courage to speak to a man everyone else was terrified of. The odds of you staying when the bullets started flying. Sarah turned her hand over, interlacing her fingers with his. I didn't stay for the odds, Enzo. I stayed because I saw something too. What did you see? I saw a father who was breaking apart, Sarah whispered. Everyone saw the monster of Chicago. I just saw a man who loved his sons enough to burn the world down for them. I figured that was a man worth saving. Enzo looked at the boys. Leo was currently explaining to Luca that the red crayon was faster than the blue crayon. They were arguing about colors. They were arguing about sight. You'll change the ending, Sarah, Enzo said, his voice thick with emotion. This story, it was supposed to end in a tragedy. A blind Don, dead sons, a war with no winner. You rewrote the whole book with 4 words. They are being poisoned, Sarah recited the words softly. No, Enzo shook his head. He looked deep into her eyes, the intensity of the old Don surfacing for just a moment. Those were the words that started the war. The words that saved me were different. Sarah looked confused. Which ones? Enzo smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. I will stay. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She remembered that night in the safe house, the choice between running and fighting. I'm glad I stayed, she whispered. Daddy, Mummy, look! Luca was standing up in the booth, pointing out the window. The rain had just stopped, and the clouds were breaking apart over the Chicago skyline. What is it, Luca? Enzo asked, snapping out of his trance. The sky is on fire, Luca shouted, pointing at the sunset. It was a magnificent sunset. The pollution and the storm clouds had mixed to create a canvas of violent violet, burning orange, and deep, bruising gold. It was chaotic and beautiful. It's not fire, silly, Leo said, pushing his glasses up his nose. It's the sunset. Miss Jenkins, Mummy, taught us that. Enzo looked at the sunset. He watched the light reflect in the clear, bright eyes of his sons. He watched them track a flock of birds flying south. He watched them see the world that he had fought to give them. He realized then that the darkness was truly gone. The shadows that had stalked the Moretti bloodline for generations had been banished by the bravery of one woman. Enzo Moretti, the man who used to own the night, finally found peace in the light. Yes, Enzo said, pulling Sarah close and kissing her temple. It's a sunset, and tomorrow the sun rises again. He signaled Al for the check. The war was over, the boys could see, and for the first time in his life, the godfather of Chicago had absolutely nothing to worry about. And that is the incredible saga of the twins of the Mafia boss. From the sterile silence of a hospital room to the chaotic joy of a diner booth, it shows that even the darkest family secrets can't survive the light of truth. Enzo Moretti thought he needed power to save his sons, but he learned he needed the one thing money couldn't buy. Someone brave enough to tell him he was wrong. It wasn't the guns or the money that saved the Moretti legacy. It was a waitress, a nursing textbook, and the courage to whisper 4 words that changed everything.